Nick, how's it going? Good to take a bit of time to chat with us. If you could just start off by filling in our readers, pretty much anyone who's been living under a rock, who you are and where you've been.
Cheers, Gregory. Thanks for asking us to do this chat and just answer some questions for you. Um, I think my name's Nick Grantham, and I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I work in performance sport. So I've been doing that for the last 15 years across a range of different governing bodies, home institutes, and more recently over the last 7 years I've been freelance. So I work for myself, again with governing bodies, professional teams, and also individuals.
Good stuff, good stuff. I'll get into it a wee bit later with some of the clients you have worked with and who you currently are.
Mhm.
But when and how did you actually get into the field of strength and conditioning?
Um, well, I think originally it was probably 1992. I was working for an insurance company, so I left school at 16, worked in financial services for 6 years, and I was absolutely horrible at it. At the same time, I was doing taekwondo, and I was pretty decent at that. And I remember we was at a squad training session, and got chatting to some Scottish guy, Alan Cosgrove, and Alan was telling me that he was at university and he was doing sports science, and I didn't even know you could do sports science at that time, or go to university. Like, none of my family have ever been to uni. Um, so I was intrigued. I looked into it in a bit more detail, and to cut a long story short, went to night school, got the entrance requirements, and went to university. Went to the same university as Alan, which made sense as we were on the same team and training together, and spent 4 years there. So that really got me into sort of sports science. And then at the time, strength and conditioning didn't even exist in the
Yeah,
UK. There was no strength and conditioning profession. It was ex-military, ex-PTIs, or ex-sports people that looked after the fitness of our athletes. So I went into sports science, worked as a physiologist, quickly realised that was pretty dull. All you did was take blood lactates and VO2 maxes. I was interested in what took place in between fitness tests. How did they get better? So, again, speaking to Al by this time had gone out and started living in America, and he was talking about strength and conditioning. And I'm not saying I've got some sort of amazing sort of crystal ball, but trends from the US tend to hit the UK at some point, and I just figured that this might be the next big thing in the UK. So at the time, the NSCA ran their first accreditation in the UK, which I sat. And at
yeah,
that point, I decided that I was going to call myself an S&C coach and move away from exercise physiology and sports science as it was, commit career suicide, as my current employer told me, and started working as an S&C coach.
Oh, good, interesting story. I was going to ask about Alan Cosgrove because I know you guys are good friends. So you weren't obviously tempted then to follow him out to America then, or
No, it was quite good that he actually left and went to America, because he does my head in. Um, I can say that because he's in America and he probably won't listen to this. No,
no,
I
no.
think yeah, never say never. I think if you ask Alan, he probably never like strategically intended to stay in America. It was just one of those things. We went to a summer camp together. He stayed on, did some work in a gym in New York, and never came back. So yeah, I think circumstances just took him down that route. At the time, it wasn't something that I wanted to pursue in the US. Again, I think it's knowing where you're at in terms of your markets, and knowing the UK at the time was still beginning to understand how to use sports science and strength and conditioning. So maybe in my mind, it was a better place to be, somewhere that was learning, so that I could learn alongside it, if you know what I mean, rather than going somewhere like North America where strength and conditioning is firmly entrenched and it's very difficult to break into.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely, totally agree. So, and just coming on from there then, so if you could maybe just tell some of the listeners about your current training methods and philosophies, and maybe how you came to those.
Yeah, I've whittled it down over the years, and I was thinking about that before we started speaking, and I think the first one is train with a purpose. I wish I'd come up with that, but I think that's one of Vernon Gambetter's. But I love that. So that encapsulates a whole range of things. But basically, every session you do should have some sort of training outcome. You know, it's very easy. We see a lot in this day and age. People just emptying athletes and clients' tanks
Yeah,
with
yeah,
no, and you just asking yourself, okay, you've worked hard, you've sweated a lot, and you're out of breath. But what have you actually achieved? What was the
uh,
training outcome? So for me, every session has to be training with a purpose, and that encompasses using sort of movements rather than your muscles, ground-based exercises, functional exercises, whatever that means. Just making sure that everything you do is productive. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the importance of recovery and regeneration, or invisible training. I think
yeah,
that's one side of the coin that often gets overlooked. So we spend all our time training, but we don't actually look at recovery. So that's crucial. And I think linked to those two things is this concept of a 24-hour athlete. So trying to work with the clients and the athletes I'm working with, saying, look, okay, I see you 3 times a week, but there's a bunch of time outside of that you could go and screw up this carefully periodised training program. So you've really got to be on it and thinking about what you're doing on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, week-to-week basis, really.
yeah, yeah. No, obviously from that, you clearly educate your athletes then.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important for us not to create this reliance on the coach. Some coaches do like that. They like to create a real sort of need with their athletes because I guess it keeps them earning money. I'd rather educate my athletes, teach them so they understand what they're doing. If people understand why they're doing something, far more likely to adhere to it and buy into it if they understand the principles. And ideally, what you do is you coach them to a point where not you don't become redundant, but they don't require as much input from you because they're thinking athletes. They can figure stuff out for themselves rather than us having to hold their hands all the time.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think it's much more beneficial empowering athletes, to kind of make their own decisions and educating them. But you touched there a little bit on the kind of recovery and regen. Can you give us a bit of insight into maybe some of your more preferred methods of kind of that? I know you kind of you speak sometimes about altitude training and some other interesting methods that maybe over here in Ireland aren't as big a market for it here. So if you could maybe touch on those for us, it would be great.
Yeah, well, I guess it's cut the different ends of the spectrum in terms of recovery and regeneration. I think elite sport tends to focus a lot on the top end of that spectrum. So they're looking at the fancy stuff, the cryotherapy, your compression garments, your sort of stress diagnostics, which are all well and good, but they cost a bunch of money. And scientific effectiveness, do we actually know that it stands up? I'm not so sure. Whereas really what we need to do, which is not particularly sexy and interesting, is focus on the basics, the fundamentals. So key for me is sleep. That's one of the most important aspects of. That's one of the cornerstones. Then there's body management, and that's everything from sort of passive and active recovery strategies to warm-ups and cool-downs, flexibility, mobility, type work. Just being able to, athletes should become masters of their own body. They should understand what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then the final cornerstone of that is nutrition. And I'm not talking about fancy supplementation regimes. I'm just talking about educating athletes again. Let's get the foundations right first. Let's eat a balanced diet. Let's make sure the food that we're eating, we can pronounce the ingredients on the back of the tin,
Yeah,
and let's keep it as clean as possible. So yeah, they're not particularly innovative, I would suggest, but I was just doing a talk this morning on recovering regeneration and trying to explain to the guys that were sat there, the sports scholars, that putting on compression garments and going into a cryotherapy chamber is not going to undo a lack of sleep, poor diet, and poor body maintenance. You've got to have the foundations nailed on first and foremost.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Take a very holistic approach myself on that. But in terms of with athletes like that, do you not find a lot of kind of athletes are kind of worried about that? Maybe 1 or 2%, as opposed to, like you say, worrying about the simple basic things like nutrition, sleep, and the basics.
Yeah,
Do you find that with them?
absolutely, Greg. I think again, performance sport, Dave Brailsford has kind of championed this aggregation of marginal gains. And as a principal, I absolutely understand what he's saying, and probably in the setting that they're at, where they probably have dotted the I's and crossed the T's, they are trying to squeeze out marginal gains in every aspect. But
Yeah,
I see often individual athletes and teams that talk about, oh, what's the small percentage things that we need to do, and you're looking and saying, absolutely, fundamentally, your program is not sound. You've not got the
yeah,
basics in place. So you're trying to focus on this 1 and 2%. You're trying to put the icing onto a non-existent cake. So
yeah.
that's where I think some sports and athletes try and be innovative, and it's like, actually, you don't need to be. You just need to get the basics done properly.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. I
It's not it's
use
not
that.
quite it's not quite as interesting and sexy though, is it?
It's not. I mean, I suppose a lot of kind of coaches and even athletes too are maybe trying to make a name for themselves
Mm.
or two. But I totally agree. I use the icing on the cake analogy a lot myself. But I suppose it's just kind of the age we're in now, where people are always looking for shortcuts. But
Yeah.
and in terms, just to wrap up on the kind of regen, then is there any kind of technology you use where you get your athletes to record, they're sleeping or anything like that, or is there
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
you?
we've used subjective and objective monitoring tools. I've gone from back in the day where it was all pencil and paper and printed out, and now trying to get more sophisticated by the use of spreadsheets and downloadable applications. Um, I think it's probably easier than it ever has been to record data in a way that can then churn out meaningful information. But again, surprised at how many people don't do that, don't record simple measures. Again, I sat with 12 elite scholars at a local university and asked them who kept a training diary, and not one of them kept a training diary. So it absolutely baffles me. That was one of the key things that I had when I was training was my scrappy 1992 diary that I carried around with me everywhere and wrote in everything that I did.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think monitoring is absolutely crucial.
yeah, yeah, totally agree. I'm a little bit guilty sometimes of not recording keeping a training diary, but it's I'm a big fan of them too. But moving on then, just as I do own a gym equipment company, I'll have to ask, what does your ideal weight room look like, or sports performance facility look like? Can you
You
kind
might
of
wish you'd
touch?
not. Well, being a gym manufacturer, equipment manufacturer, you might wish you'd never asked me that question. Um,
Get some good ideas.
yeah, well, they might not make you much money. The first thing for me as a coach is I want space.
Yeah,
I think that's key. I've walked around a lot of performance facilities and seen them spoiled because equipment manufacturers have spoken to the administrators and the architects and the designers and sold them every piece of kit under the sun. This tends to be more commercially driven rather than performance driven, and then you
yeah,
see this
yeah,
fantastic space that's just overloaded with kit, and then once you add human beings into the mix, it's just an absolute mess. So for me, space is absolutely crucial. I like my spaces to be uh, filled with kit that's got multiple functions. So
Yeah.
that they can do a variety of things. They can either be moved, picked up, and put into different places, or you can do a variety of exercises from them. So again, one piece of kit, multiple applications. Anyone that knows me and that's worked in the facility that I've run, they know that I've got a mild case of OCD, I think, so it needs to be tidy. I like all my kit stacked away and kept in good working order, and with clearly defined work areas. That's the key for me.
Yeah, that's God. It's funny you should mention those points because I've put a few gym design guides for amateur teams over here in Ireland, particularly for GAA and
Yeah,
rugby. But that's the two things that I talk about is space and. I also say, if you can't do maybe five things with a piece of equipment, like, do you really need it? And
yeah,
it's probably a reason, people ask me how the equipment company has actually grown so quickly. And I don't know, I go in to meet people that aren't educated in this, and I'll say to them, you don't need this much of equipment. I'm actually telling them don't spend so much
yeah,
money,
yeah,
and they almost think that I have an ulterior motive. But
yeah.
yeah, it's good to hear. That's a very similar philosophy I would have.
I think
Um,
the one other thing I'd add to it, which I just thought of, is if we could just tell every architect that builds a gym to allow for sufficient bloody ceiling height, because you go to so many facilities that are amazing, and then once they've put the drop lighting in and stuff, you've actually got nowhere to press overhead. So yeah, please, architects, make buildings with at least 3 meters clearance.
Yeah, totally. It's funny you mentioned that one too. I'm currently approaching a lot of architects because, unfortunately, in a lot of facilities, the gym is an afterthought.
Yeah,
For I was in one for there's a gym we're doing at the minute, and the architects, it's maybe not their fault because it's not their main market, but they wanted to put a suspended ceiling in. They just had to ring him and say, please do not do that. It's you simply can't. The athletes won't be able to press overhead, but. Yeah, it's no, we'll get there. But and just further on from that, then, Nick, what is your favorite gym you've ever been in? Then,
oh, blimey. There you go. There's a question. My favourite gym I've ever been in. Wow. That's a great question. Let me think. Oh, you've put me right on the spot there. I think there's a couple that spring to mind for different reasons. I loved going to a colleague, Robert Doshemedios, who runs the strength and conditioning program out at College of the Canyons in
that's right.
California. And this is not a fancy schmancy facility by any stretch, but I sat and watched him work with 100 American football players in a morning lifting session, and it was just great to see the way that he commanded the space and managed to get a session delivered with that number of people. So I really enjoyed being in and around that space. On that same trip, I went to the Cirque du Soleil, their headquarters up in Canada, and again, not really looking like an S&C gym, but it was just fascinating watching all this eclectic mix of performers coming together and training in what they consider to be an S&C facility. It was so yeah, it was good. I don't like many facilities. Don't have to be fancy really for me. Most of the fancy ones I can't stand.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
think of a couple that I've visited recently that I'm just like, oh my god, it looks great. I'm sure people in suits that are being shown around it think it's amazing, but just not what S&C coach would have in place.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's yeah, certain gyms can be overkill. I mean, there's some of the American strength and conditioning facilities for the colleges, and the money that's being put in, is it's almost borderline disgusting.
Yeah,
But it's yeah, I suppose everything is a little bit bigger and better there. But Couple more quick fire questions just for you.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot again.
Okay.
If you could only, I kind of hate this question, but
But
I'm
you're
going
going
to
to ask
ask
it
it.
anyway, so.
If you could only perform one exercise,
um, one exercise. I go clean and jerk.
yeah,
I think you get a lot of bang for your buck from that. I think, and also I'd have to add all the derivatives from a clean and jerk would be my one exercise.
that's cool. That's cool.
Is that a controversial one? I don't know. Does everyone say squat?
You got a few different ones on that. Would all of just on the Olympic lifting one? Would you have all your athletes Olympic lifting? Is that kind of the end goal, or
Nope.
no?
No. Again, training with a purpose. What's your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? Olympic lifts may be the best approach. Olympic lifts may absolutely be the worst approach, depending on a whole variety of factors that come into play. So I look at it on a case by case basis. What I need to get from the program, how quickly I need to achieve it, and Olympic lifts. You need a good level of technical competency to get the most from them. So again, I think some coaches program them because they feel there's a pressure that they have to have them in there, and you
Yeah,
see athletes supposedly training for power, but their technique's pretty funky and they're not actually getting the benefit. Where you could probably look at some simpler exercises and get as much, if not more, transfer of training. So yeah, I think a good coach will be pragmatic and look at the athlete and the circumstances and then decide what exercise is most appropriate. Whereas I think some coaches will pick the exercise and then try and make the athlete fit around that.
yeah, definitely, totally agree. And on that, I know you've worked a lot with professional footballers and a few of the clubs. Can you give a little bit of insight into that, or without
Um,
obviously going into too much?
I won't really go into too much detail. I don't really want to name names or anything like that. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to work in a variety of settings in professional football from across a range of levels, from international through to Premiership and Championship teams. So it's interesting because each, I guess, each setting has provided its own challenges, and yeah, I think football often comes in for a little bit of a bad rap from S&C coaches that probably have never worked in it before.
yeah,
It's always easy to look from the outside and look in, which probably, if I'm honest, I probably did that for a number of years.
yeah,
Sat and threw stones at them, saying how rubbish they were and how undedicated they were, and lack of training. But I think actually go and spend some time, work a season, go and work with some of the pros, and I think there's a lot of good taking place. I think there's still, as with any sport, I'm sure you could go to professional rugby teams and it'd be absolutely horrible. I think that there's a lot of football clubs that are trying to do some very, very good things. It's just it's an interesting environment to work in, that's for sure.
yeah. No, it's like you say, it's very easy to throw stones from looking in, but over here, when I would speak to guys, and people do maybe think that rugby players are more dedicated, but you've obviously shown that there are guys, in professional football that are very, very dedicated too.
Yeah, I think I'm sure we could all go to whatever club we wanted to, and even go to Olympic sports, and you will find good, bad, and indifferent in every setting. I think it's very easy to just look at a whole sport and just go, oh yeah, they're rubbish. Um, it's just a bit naive, I think, to do that. And you get a lot of guys that will. Everyone looks at Olympic athletes and think that they're amazingly dedicated and awesome. Well, not necessarily so.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you spoke at the start how you'd done the same course as Alan Cosgrove. So You obviously have a bit of both, with the hands-on experience. But what would you say, Nick, is more important? Would it be, in the trenches under the bar experience, or are you more of a fan of formal education?
I think for a modern strength and conditioning coach that's graduating and wanting to work in the profession now, I think the
Yeah.
two are inextricably linked. I actually looked up what inextricably meant. So it's basically, they're so intertwined that you can't separate them anymore. And I think earlier in the profession, you could probably get away with not having as many book smarts and going back on your coaching skills. But now I think you've got to have both. And here's the issue. I think as strength and conditioning certifications and formal education pathways have come to prominence, I think we are now we're in danger of getting a new breed of S&C coach. So we're getting these guys that have got great book smarts, but actually have no coaching skills. So I think the big thing for me is when students are choosing workshops and courses and degree courses and postgraduate certifications to go on, they've got to look at not only what does the course bring them in terms of book smarts, they've got to look
Yeah.
at the people that are actually coaching it and teaching it. Who are these people? Have they coached? Do they still coach? Do they get their hands dirty? What have the students gone on to what jobs have they gone on to secure? What work placements are available for them? Because I think, everyone can pass a degree. It's not difficult. You just have to work for 3 years and sit an exam. That's
Yeah.
easy. That tells me one thing about you, that you've got a level of dedication. But what I want to know as an employer is, can you actually get out there and coach a squad of 18-year-old rugby players? Can you command their attention and get a session delivered in 30 minutes in a crappy gym under the stadium of your local club?
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, like having a degree it's almost, as you say, it's just a test of, are you disciplined to follow up?
Yeah,
I mean, I spent 5 years at university, and I would say I probably learned more in 6 months in the real world.
yeah,
It's, I am a fan, like you are, probably of formal education. But at the same time, there is a matter of just being in the trenches as well. But for someone, then, have you got any kind of advice for young coaches? Or I know a lot of guys, I get a lot of questions, and people are confused. Should they be doing reps or UKSEA, or can you give some advice for guys on that? Or
I think I do quite a lot of talks to aspiring S&C coaches, and it's interesting how few of them have actually got a strategic plan about what they want to do.
yeah,
So I spoke to a group of MSc students that are going to graduate in a year's time and said, right, what are you doing now? You've got 12 months. What are you doing now to set yourself up for a job in 12 months' time? And none of them were doing anything. So I'm thinking,
yeah,
well, what, you just think this job's going to come along and land on your lap in 12 months' time? You're deluded. So I guess I would encourage people to look at what you want to do. I knew, having worked in financial services for 6 years, I knew I didn't want to ever go back to that. I didn't ever want to go back to working in a cubicle in an open plan office. And I
yeah,
knew I wanted to work in elite sport. I remember saying that to one of my lecturers when they asked a question. I was like, I want to work with elite athletes. And then it's figuring out, right, if that's what you want to do, what are the stepping stones to get you there? No national team is going to take on a fresh graduate. So what have you got to do to make yourself stand out? And I think it's just setting a realistic plan, just as you would when you're writing a training program. You ask your athlete, what's your goal? What event do you want to compete in? Where are we at now? Right, this is the process we're going to do to logically get you to that point. And that's what you've got to do in terms of your career. Ultimately, where do you want to work? Is
yeah.
it this country? Is it another country? Is it what squad is it? And start looking at the stepping stones that will get you closer to that, and have a plan.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've touched on a great point there of having the end goal. And for any young coaches, it would be great to almost, set their goal where they want to be and almost reverse engineer it, in
Yeah,
terms of how they get there.
yeah.
I wish I had known that a few years ago, but no, it's great advice. And on that, I'm a huge fan of continuous education and away from the actual strength and conditioning side. I
Yeah.
know you have an interest in on the business side too. So another awkward question, but your favorite three books that you've read? And
Okay.
this is more in the kind of business marketing side of things.
Okay. Favorite three books, which probably cross. Well, okay. Um, my best book, the one that I always recommend to people, is How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Dan or Carnegie?
Yeah, Dale Carnegie. So
Yeah.
my wife thought that was hilarious because I'm known for having a fairly small circle of friends. So when she saw me reading that book, she thought it was hilarious because she thought it was like a self-help book on how to actually get friends. I explained to her that I don't need lots of friends, which is probably a good reason. But that book, even though it was written in the 1920s, has had a massive impact on the way that I approach working with coaches or athletes or performance directors, because it talks to you about, I mean, essentially what we want to do is we want to get people to do what we want them to do, and you have to make it their idea. So if you're trying to sit down with a performance director and explain to them why the athletes need to do a certain training program, you've got to convince them of how to do that. And that book, even though it was written in the 1920s, is still some great advice in there. That's helped me out no end in work. The second book that I think is a must read is Speed Trap by Charlie Francis.
Charlie Francis. Yeah.
Phenomenal book, really interesting. I've got a hardback edition of that won't leave my house. That's going to be under lock and key. I think I'll give it to one of my kids when I pass away. When I'm old and grey, they can have Speed Trap. They'll be really pleased about that. Thanks, Dad. Yeah, that's just a phenomenal insight into the whole drugs scandal that besieged Ben Johnson, and it looks at why they did it, how they did it. Just a great book, and I think more importantly, as a coach, there's some great coaching methodologies in there, because regardless of what you think of the late Charlie Francis, in terms of coaching methodology, he was ahead of the game. Some of the things that he put in place there, I've implemented and used. Not the drug side, some of his training methodologies I've put in place with athletes I've worked with. It's just really simple. You're reading a sort of a biographical book, but you're getting some real training nuggets from it as well.
Yeah, he definitely does share some great stories in that book.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then I guess the other one is the one that I've really enjoyed. I'm not sure if it's going to help many people. Is The Secret Race by Tyler Hamilton and Daniel Coyle, and that was just one of those fascinating reads this summer. Again, that just blew the lid on what we probably all knew in our heart and hearts was taking place, but we didn't want to think about it too much because the story was too good. But yeah, that's a great read.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. I've just jotted down a wee note of.
It's a good one. I've read a lot of cycling books, and I'm just interested in what goes on behind the scenes, and that's a good book.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely check it out. I've got a bit of a obsession of buying books, and half of them don't get read, but I need to kind of get through them. But I'll definitely check it out. No, it's definitely good that. But just moving on, we're kind of finishing up. But can you give us a wee bit of insight just on kind of what the rest? I know we're almost at the end of the year, but what the rest of 2013 and in the new year, what your plans are, Nick?
I think that the plans are for me is, so I'm freelance, so I work for myself. So there's probably two strands to it. There's the coaching side. So moving forward into new year, it's consolidating the work that I do. So as I said before, I work with a professional team. I'm just starting working with the Birmingham Royal Ballet, which is going to be a really interesting project. Working with them over the next 12 months with some of their rehab specialists and some of the performers. So I'm really excited about that because I just like the crossover between sport and performing arts. So that'll be a great opportunity. And then I've got a small group of athletes that I work with privately here in Newcastle, young aspiring talents, with a couple that are pushing for Commonwealth Games next year. So that will be interesting to see if we can get any of those competing in Glasgow. So there's the coaching side, and then there's the sort of the flip side of what I do is the education side. It's workshops and writing and just trying to spread S&C information out there. So I've got a couple of little projects on the go. I've just about to finish self-publishing a book, You're Hired, which looks at the strength and conditioning profession and advice and information on how to break into it and how to develop that sort of strategy that I talked about before. So we've just got to work out the best way of getting that out and about. And then I've just this week signed a contract with a publisher to write a proper grown-up book, which is quite scary because it'll be an actual book that will get released back end of next year and will be in no doubt by the time it's finished a bookstore near you. So I'm really excited and I'm very nervous about that because it's one thing to self-publish a book, but then when you've got a proper, like I say, proper grown-up book being made, I'll be interested to see what the reaction's like from friends and colleagues.
Yeah, no, it's a very exciting project. I
It
didn't
is.
actually
I've got to
didn't
write the
know.
bloody thing now.
Yeah, that's well, you've got a while to get cracking on that, but no, but that's yeah, because I was just going to ask you, what other programs, guys could find out more about you, but you've kind of covered a lot of them, but also then can you just tell guys where they can find some more about your blog and that?
Yeah. So if you go to www.nickgrantham.com, it's going to get updated at the start of the year. I'm having a bit of an overhaul on a range of fronts. That website's been going for about 5 years. It's looking a bit old and clunky now, so it's going to get freshened up, and there'll be a bunch of new content going on there. I didn't write on it for about 6 months this year because I think you get a lot of people to just put blogs up and just write rubbish for the sake of writing it. I didn't think I had much that was useful to say for 6 months, so it wasn't until last month that I put a new post up. So the information that goes on there, I think, is decent. You won't get bombarded with information and sales pitches.
Yeah, no, you definitely do have some great blog posts on there.
And I try and be a little bit light-hearted with my posts most of the time. They're not too serious.
Yeah, I think it's a big one too, because I don't know, it's pretty hard reading, research and published reports. Whereas, if you're reading your blogs, you're still learning a lot, but it's it's a little bit lighthearted.
Maybe it's a little bit more user friendly. I've got one in mind that I'm going to get out before the end of the year that will be just that.
Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. And well, one question which I kind of forgot to ask,
Yeah.
in terms of the fitness industry, is always loads of different trends and that. This kind of two-pronged question. One, what kind of do you see do you see any new trends coming through? You had mentioned about America being ahead. Have you anything on that?
I think, I think it probably. I did a workshop for Matt Roberts. His staff did an in-service training for his guys at the start of the year on exactly this. And one of the things that I said was monitoring. I think ongoing monitoring of training is going to take off in a huge way as technology that's only ever been used with elite athletes, things like GPS, is becoming increasingly accessible. And whether we think that the kit that's put into the bottom of a shoe or a football boot is as technologically rigorous as the sorts of kit we use with an elite athlete is neither here nor there. I think you're going to start seeing recreational athletes wanting to record every foot strike, every change direction. They'll want the stats and the numbers and the information. I'm not sure they would necessarily know what to do with it, but if you're working with an athlete that has this technology, they've got a heart rate monitor, they've got a GPS unit, they've got something that tracks an accelerometer in their footwear, then you as a coach, that's great, because that's giving you feedback. You can get that information from them. You can track their performances. I think that's going to be an area that will continue to grow, I think, in popularity with general population.
Yeah, definitely. And out of curiosity, do you use heart rate variability with your athletes, or
not a huge amount? I mean, we do look at some stress diagnostics with individual cases. Heart rate variability would be one measure that we'd be using to do that. Again, it's not something we have widespread access to.
Yeah, definitely. And the other kind of question, which I would be interested to hear, obviously, CrossFit's a huge, I don't know, trend, but it's exploding.
Yeah.
Here and I think everywhere. What are your thoughts on CrossFit, or?
You're trying to get me hate mail, aren't you?
No, like CrossFit, we work with a lot of boxes ourselves, but I just know people seem to love or hate it, so I just kind of.
I just find it fascinating that there seems to be this. You've either got to love it or hate it. It's look. I'm sure, but we can find things wrong with any training methodology that we look at if we want to.
Yeah.
I think CrossFit as a concept, there's a lot of stuff in there that I like. Do they get their clients doing whole body exercises, functional exercises, ground based work, Olympic lifts? Do they get them working with intensity, training hard? Yeah, all those are things that I would live and die by. And say, yeah, absolutely. If you come and work with me as an athlete, that's similar to what you're going to get from me. You're going to get a functional exercise that you can train with intensity that gives you a performance outcome. I think the flip side is there are then things that I've seen that don't particularly impress me. People with pretty funky techniques, lack of progression, regression. But then that's just a snapshot picture. And I think what I'm starting to see, and I've looked at a few CrossFit facilities and the way they're set up, is you're actually starting to see some pretty good facilities going out there now that are staffed by knowledgeable coaches and that do have beginners classes and that do progress their athletes through a sensible progression and pathway. So I'm neither for or against CrossFit. If it's a good CrossFit box with a great instructor, then I think there's probably a lot of good stuff that they're doing. But equally, there's probably another 10 in that area that are just horrible, with people just smashing clients and emptying the tanks, but with no real training purpose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's sort of the problem I see is, as you say, there are some great coaches there, and, like I've been to Olympic lifting competitions and they're busier than ever, gymnastics, like there's so much good of what they're doing, but I think you get, like anything, people are now just chasing money and they see it as somewhere where, oh, this is easy, I can open a gym for low cost, get loads of people in and make money, but they are going to injure people. But I suppose it can happen in any kind of...
Oh, Greg, it can happen anywhere. And you know what? I think there's a massive amount of hypocrisy and snobbery within strength and conditioning. And I used to be the same, mate. Listen, when I worked at the EIS, I thought sun rays shone from my backside because I was looking at it thinking, oh yeah, I'm amazing. I work with all these amazing athletes, and I'm fantastic. And anyone that doesn't work with elite athletes is absolutely wasting their time. And Alan Cosgrove, me and him are good pals, right? And he just tells me how it is because we know we can take it. And he was just like, Nick, you want to have a look at yourself, mate. He said, you get given your athletes. They have to come. They have to come to you. They have no choice. The sport is told you go and train with this guy. He said it's easy for you. He says you come and work in my setting, where if I don't do a good job, that client walks and leaves. He says you try doing that, and I was like, actually, Al, bloody hell, that's a valid point, mate. And I think there is a lot of snobbery where people that work with a team or a national governing body or a home institute that have never tried to work in the private sector, that have never worked with a general member of the public or a recreation athlete, will stand there and look down their nose at people and say, yeah, it's all rubbish, without actually having gone and looked. And I think I was guilty of that in the past. So, do you know what? CrossFit, I'm sure there's good out there, and I'm sure there's bad out there. I think you just got to judge each place as you see it, and call it as you see it.
Yeah, that's great honesty
I was
there.
getting a bit soapboxy there, wasn't I? I was getting a bit riled.
No, it's genuine, which I love, you know. So you've one last question, just
Yeah.
because, just going from then being with the institute, then can you give us just a wee bit of an insight, you know, from going into being, because a lot of, you know, our customers are independent gym
Uh-huh.
owners or aspiring to do that.
Yeah.
So give us a bit of a, you know, how you transitioned from, you know, being in that job to, you know, being your own boss, if you like, or freelancing.
Yeah, it didn't quite transition as I expected it to. But I was basically, cut a long story short without going into too many details, I was left kind of in a position where I had no choice at the time, but to try and make this private facility work, which I did for 5 years, and then I've passed that on to a colleague that's now running that successfully. So it was just a case of grafting and making it work. And I think it's an increasingly it's a growth area now.
Yeah.
Private strength and conditioning facilities. I think the UK general population are starting to wake up to the idea that big box gyms aren't giving them what they need, and I think also people that are coming out with degrees are realising, actually, I can't go and work for Man U. There aren't the jobs there, so the option is open up your own facility, and I think we'll start to see more and more of those popping up in every town and city that you live in. So I think it's a good market to go in, and I think you still need to be a very good coach. You know, I don't think you can just get away with marketing. You will do for a little while, and then after you'll get found out. So I think first and foremost you've got to be a great coach, create a great training environment, and the individuals will come to you then.
Yeah, no, it's great advice, because you know people can very easily now, especially with the likes of social media, can it be portrayed as, you know, being an expert without any kind of, as you say, coaching. So there's some great advice there for people. But Nick, I don't want to keep you too much longer there. For we've almost been chatting close to an hour now. So I know you are very busy. So just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time. And I've got a couple of pages I was kind of jotting down, even though we were recording, some notes. So picked up a couple of gems there. So I'm looking forward to getting Secret Race too.
Yeah, no, it's
So
good. Get reading it now. And well, thanks for asking me to speak to you and answer your questions. Hopefully, the information I've given has been useful.
yeah, no, it definitely has, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for your two books coming out too.
And I'll tell you what, because I am terrible at this. If anyone wants to get hold of us, like at Coach Nick G on Twitter. Occasionally,
Yes.
within 140 characters, I say something that's quite interesting. And if people want to ask me a sensible question, don't ask me to write your degree for you. If I think you can get the information from a library, I'll tell you to go to the library. But you can email me at info@nickgrantham.com. Sometimes it takes me a couple of weeks to get back to people, but as long as it's a decent, interesting question that's articulate, I'll respond.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you. I have emailed you before, and fair play, you did get back very promptly.
That's a good job. It's a good job you
So
said that. See, look, that's good.
there's an endorsement for you, but hopefully too many people don't be plaguing you.
No, that's all right. I've got a spam filter. It'll be okay.
That's good stuff. Good stuff. Well, here I'll let you shoot on. But thank you very much, Nick, for as I say for doing this, and hopefully the guys listening to it find it very beneficial. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Cheers, mate.
All right, Nick.